Bond, James Bond, racism, sexism. How has Bond survived all these decades? You know that the James Bond film series has been laden with sexism, maybe even racism, but we see an evolutionary process happening, and we found a great new book which covers all of this. His World Never Dies, The Evolution of James Bond by Dave Holcomb. So join us today as we discuss all of this with the author. Hi, this is Dan Silvestri.
And Tom Pizzato.
From SpyMovieNavigator.com, the worldwide community of spy movie fans. Spy movie podcasts, videos, discussions, and more. If you like our podcast, please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes and Google Play. That helps us. Join us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram too. And when you have some feedback, an idea for a podcast, or something you want to say, just click the big red button on our website that says send us a voicemail, or send us a message through Facebook, and we may include it on the show. Join us as we're cracking the code of spy movies. And what better way than to start today looking at a book that's all about the James Bond spy movies.
So, Dan, when we went down to Bloomington, Indiana in the U.S. to check out the Fleming manuscripts. They have them in that library, the Lilly Library down there.
They own 11 of the original Ian Fleming James Bond manuscripts.
And even after reading the books, we knew the sexism was there in James Bond, but then there was a little bit of a racial overtone. But when you actually read the manuscripts and stuff that got scratched out before it actually made it in, there was definitely more racism in there than I was expecting, or racial overtones. I don't know the right word for it. I don't know if it was overt, but definitely something there.
Yeah, a lot of it was scratched out by Fleming, and so some of it survived in the book. They toned it down a little bit. So we thought that it was weird to see this typed out and then scratched out and then other stuff handwritten in by Fleming that kind of softened a little bit of the racism stuff, especially. And so we thought this is a great topic, and this is why we're going to talk to Dave Holcomb right now in our newest segment, The Smartest Spy in the Room. Hey, today we have a special guest with us today, Dave Holcomb. He's the author of this great little book that Tom and I just finished reading, His World Never Dies, The Evolution of James Bond. And he's got all kinds of cool stuff in there talking about sexism, racism, and the whole evolutionary process of Bond. Dave, hello. This is Dan, and here's Tom.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
Our pleasure to have you on. We loved your book. It was a fun read, and you got some cool, interesting stuff. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then how long you've been a James Bond fan.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the book. I'm mostly a sports journalist, but a huge James Bond fan in my free time. And I've been a fan since I was probably about 11, I think, is when I saw my first Bond movie. It was Die Another Day. That was the first one I saw in theaters. I believe I'd seen The World Is Not Enough before that, and I talk about that in the intro. And been a huge fan ever since. Was a action hero fan or action movie fan before that, with movies like Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And I guess just the next progression, in early teens was James Bond. So I've loved the series ever since, and usually try to watch a lot of the movies around Christmas time, because that was kind of what Spike TV back in the day did. So that's how I've continued being a fan of rewatching the movies over and over again.
Cool. And so because you kind of grew up in the Pierce Brosnan era, is that your favorite Bond, or who's your favorite Bond?
I'd say he's a very close second, but Sean Connery is my favorite Bond. The classics, a lot of classic scenes and classic movies with him. I think you could call me a traditionalist, so Sean Connery is definitely my favorite.
Hey, that happens to be my personal favorite,
yeah,
too.
I'm the same on that. So
yeah.
So I guess one other question, you said that you like the action films and everything. So besides James Bond, what other spy movies do you like? I
really like True Lies, another movie, I guess, sort of from my childhood, a little bit before maybe I saw around when I was 10 years old. I really like the Jack Ryan series. I know he's not exactly a spy per se, but there are spy elements to that series. And one more recent movie I wanted to mention, Anna, that came out in April or May of this year. I thought that was a great spy movie. I think the way that they tell the plot adds to the spy element in the story, and it's forward thinking in the sense that the main character is a female, and we haven't seen a whole lot of spy movies. At least
Right.
I haven't, where the female a female is the main character. So I thought that was really cool too.
All right, let's get into the book, Dave. What motivated you to write the book?
Around last December, even a little bit before that, last summer, my fiance and I were starting to watch Bond movies. She'd never really seen a James Bond movie before, which I guess isn't. I mean, it breaks my heart thinking about it that she had not seen a Bond movie
Yeah.
before. But
Yeah.
she's didn't grow up a huge movie person like myself. I was heavily influenced by my parents who really loved movies, and I decided, kind of explaining to her and teaching her about the series, that this could potentially make a really good book. When I discovered that, hey, this is possible, then I just dove right in and started outlining and mind mapping and then writing pretty soon after I came up with the idea that I could write it. So that's kind of where the idea for the book came from.
Okay. Is your fiance coming around now, liking Bond?
She's come around to it a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Well, that's good. So Dave, I have one question on the book as I was reading it. Is you made the conscious decision, and you mentioned in the book that you're going to stick to the movies when you wrote this. And I know you read a few of the Fleming books. Is there anything that, as you read the books, that might make you change some of the things you were thinking in your book, or is it I'm going to stay on the film and we'll worry about the books later?
A little bit that I just thought bringing in the books was bringing in another element another variable that maybe I just didn't want to tackle too much. I also figured that there was going to be a large part of my audience that had only seen the movies and not read the books.
Sure.
And I'm kind of part of that audience. I really didn't read my first two books. I read Casino Royale in college about 5-6 years ago, but didn't really remember much about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then reread it after I published my book in June and read the next one, Live and Let Die. So those are still the only two I've read, and I'm planning to read them all eventually. Just got to make the time to do that. But I think if I had included the books, two things I think would have changed in my analysis is there's, I think, even more things to write about with the racism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And especially Live and Let Die. That's one of the two that I read so far, the books. And I bring up a little bit about the Live and Let Die book with Jacqueline Ristola and her quote. And I think her quote is dead on. I said that maybe she's reaching a little bit in terms of if you want to apply that quote to the movie Live and Let Die. I think Live and Let Die, the movie, has its issues, but I don't think it's blatantly racist.
No, right.
The book, I think you could say the book in today's era is pretty much just racist in how he portrays African Americans and Black people in that book. And particularly, what jumped out to me is the dialogue. Their dialogue is all broken English, and they just come across as not as intelligent as the other as the white characters in the story, and that's obviously not something that would be condoned today.
Yeah. Now that we're talking about some of the elements in your book, I mean, you talk about masculinity, femininity, race, humor, and all this other stuff over the course of the Bond movie history. Can you just kind of elaborate on the main points so our listeners will just get a quick little grasp, but then we'll go into some of the more details?
Sure. The book kind of dives into how James Bond, the movie series, has changed over its 50, almost 60-year history, starting out portraying masculinity as perfect and mostly white or all white and white European, and how that's changed over the last 50 years, how the portrayal of women and sexuality has changed as well, and how the series has become more diverse, and how it's portrayed different types of people and races of people and sexual orientation of people. It really has undergone a vast evolution over 50 years, and kind of parallels what we've gone through in society, how we've changed our views of all those things. So that I guess in a nutshell, that's kind of what the book is about.
Yeah, since we're talking about that, I mean, you're the part of the book that I really loved and was fascinated with was your your treatment of the historical gyre and the evolutionary circle of life. That you said history not only does it repeat itself, it comes full circle on itself, and then you go through the main four stages: the primitive, hierarchical, classical, and decadent. And then you say, hey, that kind of applies to the James Bond movie series as well. This is cool. I thought that was a great insight. And if you could talk about that a little bit and enlighten all of us how you came up with that concept and how it applies to the evolution of Bond.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you really liked it. The History Gyre was something that I learned about in high school. I believe I mentioned that in the book. And
Yeah.
I reached out to my high school teacher to make sure I cited it correctly. And it was kind of funny because he said he got it from another high school teacher that was in my high school that I didn't have. And then she got it from a college professor. So I guess it's kind of just been handed down to me through a few different teachers. And I tried Googling it. It's not really a popular theory yet, because I think if you Google it, I didn't find anything on it. But
Right.
it's called the History Gyre evolutionary circle. And the concept is that human society goes through in a circle through these four stages called primitive, hierarchical, classical, and decadent. And just kind of thinking about what different types of chapters I wanted to put in my book, I always found this evolutionary circle to be very interesting. That, you know, the idea that we just keep repeating ourselves, and I kind of feel like James Bond does as well. James Bond goes in this circle where we have maybe a bare bones spy movie where that I think is where Dr. No kind of started, maybe out of necessity because they couldn't really do very many special effects or gadgets back in 1962, but they slowly develop, you know, more special effects, more stunts, but more also they take more liberties with realism in the 1960s, and slowly you move to decadent, where like a movie such as You Only Live Twice, where you have a spaceship eating another spaceship.
Right.
You have Bond flying around in a one-seater helicopter that doesn't look like it would fly. More things that just aren't as realistic. And depending on who you are, you might not like that because you like your movies to be more realistic or whatever. And other people are willing to look over, such as like an invisible car or something like that, which is a little bit later on with Die Another Day. I think that was very decadent. So after a decadent movie in the series like You Only Live Twice, I noticed as I started thinking about it, then it goes back to being kind of a bare bones spy movie. And I think it's because the writers got into their room and said, okay, how do we top this? Because there is an element in Bond that, okay, that we got to be bigger and better the next time. But there reaches a point where it's like, we can't be any more unrealistic, or it's just going to be cartoonish. So we're going to just go back to the beginning.
Can you say Moonraker?
Moonraker. The invisible car was pretty close to that too.
Yeah. So they go back to the beginning, back to primitive with their, whether it's a plot line or just not as many unrealistic gadgets or whatever. And I found it very interesting that we have this circle in James Bond too, and it parallels again what society goes through, going through a circle and repeating our history.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I love that discussion in the book. I think everyone would enjoy that.
Yeah, it's actually very well done. Now, I do have one point of clarification on this, though. So you talk about the circle and the decadence, and a lot of what you talk about in terms of the decadence, to me, kind of was like more gadgety type stuff. This is, like the invisible car or the stuff in Moonraker. And in the Craig series, we haven't had a lot of that. So where are we in the History Gyre on the path. I mean, if we're coming up to Craig's last movie here, right? No Time to Die.
Yeah.
So is that time for a reset, or have they not been decadent enough? And where do you see that in the continuum?
I think we're probably around the classical, at least, for the Daniel Craig era. When we look back on it in 10, 15 years, we're going to say that Skyfall and Spectre were kind of his maybe his peak. I think people might say that Casino Royale was his best one, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But I think his peak during his tenure, kind of like Sean Connery's peak, was Goldfinger and Thunderball, and that's kind of the classical, I would say. I think we're in the classical with the Craig era, and maybe reaching towards decadent. I wouldn't expect they would reset it with Craig, because this is supposed to be his last movie. They usually go for a reset when they get a new actor playing Bond. I think the one exception was the middle of the Roger Moore era with you mentioned Moonraker. Moonraker was very decadent in my opinion. And then they went back to very bare bones spy movie with For Your Eyes Only, very underrated movie in the series.
Yeah. I love that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It is a good one. So I don't think they're going to go for the reset until Bond 26 and they have the new actor playing Bond, assuming that Craig doesn't come back again, because he did come back for this one.
Yeah, even though he said he wouldn't.
Right. He really was adamant that he wouldn't, and then he did. So assuming that he doesn't come back, I think they go for the reset and perhaps go back to primitive with Bond 26.
So when you say primitive, do you see it going back to the old misogynistic days, or is that too far back?
Oh, I think that's too far back. Yeah, I don't think they would ever try and do that, just because it would turn off the younger, newer audience that they're trying to bring into the series. I think they have done a pretty successful job of bringing in new audience members. I don't remember the exact figure off the top of my head, but I know I referenced a figure where a lot of women are going to see the new movies. When it came out, that was either Skyfall or Spectre. So I did a lot of research. I read a lot of articles about people claiming the series is dying or whatever. I don't really see that, just because they're still making them and people still love them and are going to see them. But one way that they could bring the death to the series is bringing back, at least accepting characters accepting his misogynist ways, and I don't see them doing that, because it would be too negative with the new audience that they're trying to bring in.
Yeah, that was my follow-up question to that one too. Do you think Ian Productions is doing this and adapting all these things, trying to do the right thing, or are they just trying to get a bigger audience and make more money?
Probably the latter. I can't say they're being very noble people. I mentioned I'm a sports journalist. I cover a ton of football. There's this big discussion right now in the NFL, about player safety. When we really come down to it, if you ask me, does the NFL really care about player safety? My answer is probably no. But in order to survive as a business, they have to. They have to find ways to protect their players and encourage young people to play football, because I've heard a lot of stories, at least in my hometown of Pittsburgh and my small hometown, the specific town I lived in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, Upper St. Clair, where people aren't playing football as much because it's so dangerous, and you have the head injuries. So the NFL has to adapt and care about player safety, or their business model and their business will not be around in 20 years. And I think that's kind of what the same thing with Bond. They have to care about being accepting of different types of people and races and sexual orientation and such, so that they grow their audience and continue to have an audience deep into the 21st century.
Yeah, that was a great analogy, Dave.
Yeah, I like that.
Thanks. Great. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things you talk about in the book about Bond specifically, and then we'll probably come back full circle on all this stuff at the end. So
sure.
At one point you say Bond is always what he is perceived to be. And I thought that was an interesting little statement there, because often M is disappointed in him and other people as well. So it's like, what is he that he is perceived to be? So I wanted to get your insight as to what you were thinking there and how that flows.
I didn't want to bring in politics, and I still am hesitant to bring it in too much in our discussion. There are lots of people in power, whether it's a movie director or a athlete or a politician, that they are something on TV or in their public life, and then they're kind of fake, right? They don't act the same way towards the people that they love or care about, or people that care about them.
Yeah, different personas they have, right?
Right. Yeah. And I don't see that with Bond, and kind of thinking about why we like the series so much and why we like the character so much. I think that was kind of one of his biggest redeeming qualities, that he is very forthright. He's straightforward. I wouldn't say he's honest, but he's a straight shooter. He's not going to coddle you, but he's going to tell you what he thinks, and he's going to tell you how it is. You're always going to get an honest answer from him. And I think that's one thing that the millennials can relate to and like about him. That's kind of where I was going with that line.
Okay.
All right, great. Thanks.
Yeah. And again, at another point, you do actually quote Fleming, not from the novels, but from interviews with Fleming, where he says, I don't think that he, Bond, necessarily is a good guy or a bad guy. He's got his vices and very few perceptible virtues, except patriotism and courage. And he says, which are probably not virtues anyway. I didn't intend for him to be a particularly likable person. This is Fleming saying this in interviews, and you quote him here. How does what Fleming say here shape what you talk about in the book, and which Bond in the films is most true to this Fleming characterization?
I was kind of researching again why we like James Bond, why the series has been able to last so long, longer than make more movies than any other series until the MCU, I guess, passes it like next summer. But and I was just doing some researching, asking friends and family what they liked about the series, and I came across this quote, and I just found it very ironic that I'm researching why we like this character so much, and the person that created him basically says I didn't want him to be likable, and I found that so ironic, and I had to include it. And again, and that kind of relates back to your last question, that one of the reasons why we like him so much is because he's so forthright, and he never wavers in his goal, and his goal is to save the world. And maybe he doesn't go about doing that in the most moral way all the time, but he is going to get his mission accomplished, and no one's going to stand in the way of that, whether it's a former friend like 006 and GoldenEye, or a woman that he's made love to that then betrays him, or whatever. He's not going to let anything stand in the way of the greater good, really, which is to save the world. And I think that's very noble of him, and why I would kind of, I guess, disagree with Fleming that he's, at least the movie Bond has become a likable person, at least in the fantasy sense, that it's somebody that we find is cool, and someone that we not would like necessarily want to be in real life, but someone that we can take certain attributes from his personality that we would like to be, at least. And I think to answer the last part of your question, I think Daniel Craig is the most Ian Fleming Bond. And one other thing about the books that I didn't really bring in, but could have if I wanted to talk about the books, is the Bond character in the books isn't this perfect example of masculinity. He shows more weaknesses. He's
vulnerable.
He's vulnerable, yes. And Daniel Craig's Bond is the vulnerable Bond, and that's why I think he's definitely the most the closest to what James Bond is in the books.
So is he your second favorite Bond?
That'd be third.
I guess he would be probably third, Pierce Brosnan.
Okay.
Probably because of, as you mentioned, me growing up in that era, that he would be second.
All right. Cool. There's another part in the book that you talk about. Obviously, we talked a little bit here about racism, sexism. People can get a lot more of that out of the book and all the discussions, detailed discussions of that. But in another part of the book, you talk about how this pertains to race and how in the series, some people are portrayed who are different are portrayed in certain ways. Like you talk about knick-knack and the portrayal of Asians and black people always getting killed and that kind of thing. So a little bit different than what we were talking about now. Can you give us a little insight and expand on that topic and tell us what you were thinking there and how this is evolving?
Sure. I think the series, played up to a lot of stereotypes early on with the portrayal of Asians and black people, portraying Asians as smart nuclear scientists, things like that. That kind of, it's like, of course, the smart person that is supposed to be a scientist is Asian. It's kind of like playing to that stereotype that we all have of that group of people, and they do that with the black race as well. And Live and Let Die, they a lot of them have afros, and just using tropes and things that this is how a white person sees this group, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that they figured in the 60s and 70s their audience was all white. That's what they wanted to see, but that's not really what we want to see anymore. And especially with, you're trying to bring in more Asians and black people to come see James Bond. So you have to portray those people in better lights. And they've tried to do that with different characters in the last 20 years, inserting more diversity, because even in the 60s there really weren't that many African American or black characters. So, and then they had this movie Live and Let Die in the early 70s where there were lots of black characters, but they weren't at all portrayed in a very positive light. So I explored where we started, and then how the series has tried to become more diverse. And I like that you brought up, the knick-knack thing as well, that early in the series, I mentioned, Bond is white male. They portray Western European as the ideal human, I guess you could say. And anything else that differed from that was abnormal, really. And included in all of the things that Bond is, in addition to him being white and male and straight and European, he's also good looking. And they make a lot of the villains not good looking to kind of contrast with Bond's masculinity.
A lot of times they have a deformity or whatever too, all in addition to not being good looking, right?
Right, yes.
Teehee's arm is off and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And you think they're evolving now a little bit. But I mean, we got Jeffrey Wright now as Leiter in the last 3 movies now, with this one coming up. So you think they're trying to fix that kind of stuff now in this evolutionary process that we talked about earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot more diversity in the series. I think you're going to see the most diverse cast. Just looking at the cast list for the movie coming up, there's lots of different races and genders of characters in this movie coming up. And they've stopped having a little person like Knick-Knack be kind of a sidekick villain, or having Jaws be this really unusually big and weird looking villain sidekick. They're not having their villains be these weird looking people, kind of cartoonish, to be honest. They've gotten away from that as well. I definitely think that was the way they had to go.
Well, I do have to say, one thing I really liked in your book is the way you handled that whole topic. Right, the whole topic of people being different and racism can be a pretty touchy thing to go through, and I actually really liked how you did that in the book.
Yeah, Not like how you did it right now.
Yeah, and I did it right now.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you're right. It is a very touchy subject, but I've always believed, at least since college, I think I learned this from a professor there. We don't move forward as a society unless we talk about it. So I think we have to talk about these things in order to make society better. But it is very difficult to bring up because you don't want to offend anyone. And I'm glad that I was able to bring it up in your eyes without offending anyone, because that was the last thing I wanted to do.
Yeah, I thought that was really well done. Now, I want to kind of shift gears here a little bit and go into the whole code name theory, because you have a discussion on that in the book as well, right? You talk about the concept of is Bond a code name, and you kind of go through your thoughts there. So I was wondering if you wanted to kind of expound what you got there.
Sure, yeah. For those that maybe don't know, the codename theory is a fan theory that basically says that every new actor that plays James Bond, that actually is a new James Bond, in the sense of it's a new man in the fictional world where Bond lives. That is a new person as well,
without a personal history.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That just like 007 is a code name, James Bond, when you become 007, you take on James Bond as a code name as well. And that explains why, we have different looking Bond every few years, and that every new looking Bond also comes with somewhat of a different personality, because every actor who's played Bond brings in a different personality, to be honest, a different take on the role.
Sure.
And is a little bit different, at least. So there's a theory out there that this would also help explain how, he never ages. I think that's a big thing, that people maybe are bothered that he's been around for 50, 60 years and he's never aged. How is that possible? Well, this would explain it, if you believe in this theory, that it's not the same person, that it's a new man becoming 007, becoming James Bond. And there are things in lots of the movies that support the theory, and then things that don't support the theory and even debunk the theory a little bit. So I dive into that in one of the chapters.
Sure. And I always thought, what about this theory that the entire James Bond experience, all of his missions and everything, really take place in a very confined amount of time? It's maybe 10 to 15 years of his life. All of these missions take place, and that's why he's about the same age all the time. And that's the intent, that, hey, we're not talking about 150 years of Bond here. All these missions kind of happen in this one time period. I know there's some technological issues with that.
Technology might make that tough.
With that, but
yeah.
I mean, just you got to have a willing suspension of disbelief in any kind of fiction, and so hey, maybe that's it. I always thought, hey, maybe that was one of the things that Fleming was kind of saying, hey, this is all going to be compressed, because he actually only wrote it over about 13 or 14 years period.
Right.
So
yeah. I'm not. If you had to ask me, I tried to stay neutral in the book and not say whether I was a codename theory supporter or not. But I am not. I would say that every new movie is just set in contemporary times, and you just kind of have to. I'm willing to accept that Bond never ages, just because we want technology and things that going on in this fictional world to be current and with everyday life that we have right now, contemporary. So they just place this character in contemporary times with each new mission. And if we were to write out a timeline of all of these missions, it probably wouldn't make very much sense, just because of that technology that you brought up. So,
there was one, and I'm not a codename theory person either, but there was one article that was written where they interviewed Ian Fleming's niece. And in that article, she said that Fleming originally was going to call James Bond James Secretan as his real name, and then James Bond as his name in the world of espionage and stuff. And then And then Fleming thought, that's too confusing in the books writing this, and so they dropped it. This is what his niece said anyway. So I thought, okay, either that lends itself to the codename theory or it blows it out. I don't know. But anyway, it was an interesting article. You want to look that up sometime. I thought it was fun to find.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea, and that's all about, that's all what the codename is about. Codename theory is about, and I'm interested to see how they, there's been a lot of rumors about the new one, and
Yes.
and the female spy stepping in and supposedly being the new 007, and Craig's Bond is in retirement. Well, if we're going to see James Bond in retirement, which I think we kind of did in Skyfall, but I guess this is more of a formal.
We've seen it a few times.
Yeah, we've seen it a few times.
Yeah, we have seen it a few times. That this is going to be more of an official retirement than where his name shouldn't be James Bond anymore, right? If you're a believer in the codename theory and he's retired.
It's
so
just this guy.
I'm just curious how that works and whether or not that's going to debunk the codename theory. We'll see.
Well, actually, that's actually a good point, because in your book, you there's a point where you say, just like the codename theory, the series producers aren't conscious of this evolutionary circle. So this is I'm trying to tie in the codename theory with the historical gyre, right? So you say, just like the codename theory, the series producers aren't conscious of this evolutionary circle. It's happened naturally over the decades. So can you kind of talk about, you say it's happening naturally. You don't think that the producers are particularly saying, okay, we went too far, or we've got to follow this path. And how does that kind of all fit together?
I don't necessarily think that the producers sit down and say, okay, I want to do this so that people believe in the codename theory, or we got to go back to, we've completed the circle, we're going to go back to primitive now. A little with the evolutionary circle, it might be that. I just think they sit down and they try to think of something to top the last one, and they say, okay, I can't think of anything, so we're going to go back to the beginning. That I think is the most conscious they are of the circle. And as far as the codename theory, I think it started as a fan theory, and we've seen it in a few different series on television or in movies where you have this fan theory, and then I don't know if it's because of the power of the internet or what, but it gets back to the series creators, and maybe they insert that into the story. I think that the Bond series is as part of the codename theory, they've inserted a couple things where you could point to and say, yeah, the codename theory is a thing, and then they've put in other things where it's not. And maybe I think they're doing that on purpose, perhaps, so that we can have a debate. I guess I'll bring up another sports reference. There's this big debate about the designated hitter, right, in baseball. And I think, honestly, the baseball commissioner likes that one league is different from the other, so that when baseball fans meet, they debate about the designated hitter and talk about baseball. It starts a discussion, and that's what the codename theory is for James Bond. I don't think the series really is ever going to take a stand on it one way or another, because then when Bond fans get together, they can have a discussion about it, and then James Bond is still relevant and being discussed.
Yeah, and the more people talk about it, the better it is for
Right.
Ian Productions.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
And for
good
us as
stuff.
fans.
Yeah. And there's always going to be these opposing viewpoints and that's what this discussion is all about, right? There's going to be opposing viewpoints no matter what you say. There's going to be those who say this and that, and that's the fun of all of this, is that you can make logical arguments for either one, and then you could poke holes in either one too. It's fun.
Yeah, I completely agree. That I think that's the point of it at this point, that neither one is 100% accurate, and it's fun to debate.
Yeah, so I want to take that one step further, because you had a line in the book that I absolutely love, where you said, if I had my wish, Craig's 007 would indeed ride off into the sunset with Swan. And I just thought that was great. And so if he does that, then we're going to definitely have to have that codename theory working.
Right. Yeah, that is true. And I think I did say that if I believe in the codename theory, maybe as far as to say that maybe Daniel Craig's Bond is different than the previous five.
Yeah.
I think that's probably where I stand on codename theory.
Yeah.
And that would explain, you could have the first 20 missions take place over whatever a 20-year period or something. I think that makes somewhat sense with technology, and the villains being starting out as Russian in the Cold War, and then kind of towards the end of the Cold War where it's more China and North Korea as the central bad guys. And then we have kind of a new beginning with Daniel Craig, and they show how he becomes 007. So perhaps either that's a prequel with better technology than 1962, or it is a new James Bond. And I think with all the pain that Craig's Bond has gone through, that's where I was going with that line, that I thought that was kind of where Spectre was going with that was going to be the last time we see Craig as Bond. And I think they thought that is what was going to happen, that Craig wasn't coming back.
Yeah.
And that was going to be the last shot of him and Swan driving away. And I loved that ending. And I hope we get that ending in this next one. And then it picks up with the next actor playing 007. And I guess we could have a debate whether that is a new person and Craig's Bond actually retires and marries Swan, or if this is the same person or whatever, in Bond 26.
The good thing about fiction is they can do whatever they want, right? And us fans, we're going to say, yeah, okay, it was a reboot with Craig, and now you have higher technology, but that was supposed to be the first story, and so on. I think at one point Leonard Nimoy, because they asked him, you died in the Star Trek movie, and he says, no one ever dies in science fiction. So it's just kind of like the same kind of thing. It's like, hey, he could say he's retired. We could bring him back as a young guy, and hey, we're going to run with that. We'll be fine. Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm going to go back to this one line you had before where Bond is always what we perceive them to be. And then a little bit later you say that the straightforward good versus evil blockbuster action film died about 15 years ago. And with its death came the rise of the anti-hero. So this reminds me of Mathis in Quantum of Solace, where Bond is visiting him in Italy there, and he says, when one's young, it seems very easy to distinguish between right and wrong. But as one gets older, it becomes more difficult. The villains and the heroes get all mixed up. So I'm thinking that fits in right what you're saying there. So could you explain what you mean now by, is Bond now the anti-hero, and how does this work?
I think he is, yes. I think that the series didn't want to change the Bond personality too much. They did change him quite a bit with Craig. We discussed a little bit his vulnerability, but he is still largely misogynistic. And rather than portraying that as the ideal man like they do in the 1960s, they kind of portray him as, not 100% moral. And this is not really how you want to treat women. So that's where I think this anti-hero discussion came in, that he is the hero of our story still, but he's not perfect, and that's okay. But don't try to be like him in this way, and treat women differently or better than he does. I think that's where he gets the label of anti-hero, and that kind of ties back in that line from Ian Fleming, that he wasn't supposed to be this
likable
action hero like he was early on, that actually he is supposed to be kind of an anti-hero in the books. So they've come full circle, I guess, in the sense that I think he is an anti-hero since Craig took over the role.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. Like you said earlier, and you're saying now, that Craig really is playing Bond more like Fleming wrote Bond. And so they've come full circle on that again, where he's vulnerable, he's this, he's that, and all the kinds of things we're just discussing here. So that's pretty cool. So what do you think's going to happen now? We've got No Time to Die coming out. We've got rumors of Lashana Lynch being introduced as 007. We have the concept, there's another rumor perhaps that the last line of the movie is Moneypenny leaning over Bond saying, "This is no time to die." There's all these rumors out there, of course. We have nothing else to do.
It's fun to speculate, at least.
Where do you think, in terms of the historical gyre and the evolutionary circle, what are we gonna see?
I guess your guess is as good as mine. As I said, I'd like to see him go off into the sunset with Swan, and I also said I'd like the next actor to be a black James Bond. I think that would be really cool, really evolutionary, forward thinking, even further into the 21st century as we move further into this century. But I'm not sure we're going to see any of that, to be honest. I think it's possible also that Swan ends up dying in this movie, and that was kind of another rumor that they're going to repeat kind of the On the Majesty's Secret Service plot.
Yeah, that would be being consistent.
Yeah, where he doesn't end up with his love, and then she ends up getting killed, and the fact they have two other female leads in addition to Naomi Harris, who is going to play Moneypenny again. I can't say that, oh yeah, that rumor is definitely not going to be true, because having three Bond girls is kind of a lot. When in the movies where we've had three Bond girls, one of them usually is a femme fatale, or one of them is a sacrificial lamb, and Swan could be that sacrificial lamb. I kind of hope that's not the way they go, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, there's lots of different theories and lots of different rumors, and that's what makes this all fun.
Absolutely.
We're waiting for April 2020.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll address one other rumor. I was really surprised to hear that so many people disappointed that Lashana Lynch was going to be introduced as the new 007, and I think people are kind of confused. They kind of thinking that Lynch is going to be the new James Bond because she has that code name.
Right.
And the thing that I would say is not that Bond has to be white and male, but they're not making Bond a black woman or a woman or anything like that. Bond is retiring.
Yes.
This is the rumor anyway. Bond is retiring, and Lynch is going to be taking on that code name 007. It's no different if they made her 008.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think Barbara Broccoli at one point said James Bond will never be a woman. Well, yeah, I mean, okay, I don't know how much that actually says.
But there are double O's.
But yeah,
what was it? 002, I think, or 003 was a woman.
Is that Thunderball?
It is Thunderball.
Okay. Yeah. I completely agree that whether or not James Bond is a female in the future, I don't know, but that's not the avenue they're going in or going on right now. And I was just so really kind of taken back by the backlash with that. And I heard from a couple of fans myself saying this is going to kill the series, and it's just like it's not any different than them having a female spy like Tomorrow Never Dies or Die Another Day. She wasn't a 00, but she was a British agent. I think it's Emma Swan, Miss Frost, whatever her first name of the character is.
Right.
I don't look at it any different than that she's not becoming the new Bond. And I don't want to say that like I would be against her becoming the new Bond. I would prefer Bond to be male myself, but
yeah,
a different race. I am open to that as long as it makes sense. As long as it's a race that of people that are in London and a race that would have an English background.
Yeah, my ideal would be that Bond comes out of retirement and they elevate a 00 character, female character, to be his equal, and they in the future do missions together. I think that would be ideal. That would be beautiful.
I think so too. Yeah. And one thing I didn't include in the book, I kind of thought about it after writing it. I think they could. There's the Marvel movies and MCU are so popular. Could Bond take a page out of the MCU and maybe create another series where the lead is female? I don't know if I think maybe it wouldn't work as a movie series because we're always going to make the comparison of like which one do we like better. but maybe a TV show. Maybe we could get, a James Bond like TV show where we have all the spy elements and everything, but the lead is 008, and it's a she. It's a female spy. I think that would be kind of cool.
Yeah,
that would be.
That would be cool.
It's really fun to speculate what's going to potentially happen. All right, now you mentioned the MCU stuff and competition, I guess, if you will, to the way things go. Do you see any franchises actually threatening Bond going forward?
I wouldn't say so. No, I brought up the MCU a few times. I think that's probably the closest threat to Bond, just because I guess it's threatening everything right now. But it's going to take over Bond's title of most movies in a series, and that's kind of what Bond is known for, in the sense of it's the longest running series, and it still will be the longest running for time. But MCU is going to take over the most movies in a series.
They're cranking them out faster.
They much faster pace right now. So I guess that's as a huge Bond fan, that's a little disappointing that it's not going to be number one there anymore. But it's not going to threaten them making Bond. They'll continue to make James Bond, and people can go see that movie and see the new Bond movie as well. That it's not competition in that sense.
Hey, Dave, this has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed
the book.
Yeah, and the book is terrific. Can you tell folks how they can get your book?
Yeah, give the title again, too.
His World Never Dies, The Evolution of James Bond by Dave Holcomb.
You can find it on Amazon. Just search His World Never Dies, or you can search my name on Amazon.com. That's the best place right now to buy it online. You can also reach out to me at holcombmdavid@gmail.com. I would be more than willing to send you a copy and send you a signed copy. If you send me payment through PayPal or Venmo, that would be great. Those are the two avenues right now. And I'm hoping by Christmas time to have an audiobook out on the book. I'm narrating it myself right now, trying to put it together. And I'm hoping to get a hardcover version of the book as well. And I think that'll be available on Amazon, and I'm exploring other distribution options as well. But right now, if you want to pick up a copy, check it out on Amazon or email me, holcombmdavid@gmail.com. I'll send you a signed copy.
That's great. So we recommend you do that.
Yeah, this is a really good read.
Look for it. His World Never Dies, The Evolution of James Bond by Dave Holcomb. Thanks a lot. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
All right.
Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. Thank you, guys.
That wraps up our interview with Dave Holcomb. That was a lot of fun. And Tom and I are starting.
And it was a good book, too. I mean,
you got to buy the book. Go look for it on Amazon.com. Or, like we said, you go look on our website under articles, and we have a little piece on the book there and how to get in touch with Dave personally so you can get an autographed copy of the book. Very cool.
Yeah, and his writing style, it's a pretty quick read, too. So.
Yeah, it's a nice read. So it got Tom and I thinking about the women in Bond films. And, of course, I think now Barbara Broccoli and the whole Ian production group said they're going to be called Bond women now, not Bond girls, and so on. So we don't know exactly what that's going to mean in the world, in the new movies and so on. But it got Tom and I thinking that when we were in London, we met with a woman who was in The Spy Who Loved Me.
Oh, that was great.
Naomi.
That was fun. Yeah.
She played Naomi, who collected Bond and brought him to Stromberg's place, Atlantis, and then flew the helicopter shooting at Bond as he was driving the Lotus, and he drives off the dock into the water, and it's this woman, Naomi, who's shooting at him from the helicopter and so on. And that was filmed in Sardinia, Italy, which
that
we've
was
been to.
What a
We
beautiful
went to all of
place.
them.
Yeah, that was really nice.
Well, when we were in London, we met with Caroline Munro.
Oh, she was fabulous.
Who played Naomi, and she was a pretty strong woman in The Spy Who Loved Me.
Yeah, when she's sitting there up in the helicopter trying to shoot him down and stuff.
Yeah. So we're meeting Caroline Munro in Duke's Bar.
Oh, what a great place to have a cocktail.
It was one of Fleming's hangouts.
Right.
He liked that place. And, of course, the Vesper Martini he invented in Casino Royale in like 1953-ish. And there's confusion as to where he invented it. Was it in Jamaica? Was it here? and whatever, but we drank some of them there.
They make a good one there.
And they know how to make it. And Alessandro, the bartender, the Italian bartender, liked us so much, he let us go behind the bar and shake Vesper martinis with him.
And I also like he actually did
fun.
He would do a twist where you could do either a lemon twist or an orange twist.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that, we're used to the Vesper with the
which
the
is
lemon.
a twist on the Vesper.
The twist on the Vesper. But, we like it with the lemon, but it was really good with the orange as well.
Yeah. We sampled a couple of different kinds.
Until they stopped us.
Yeah. The third one was really good, as I recall, whatever. It was really fun. And Caroline Monroe, we digress. Caroline Monroe was just a blast. She's a delightful lady. So you ever get a chance to meet Caroline Monroe, do so. And anyway, we saw her as a great, strong Bondwoman, and we loved The Spy Who Loved Me, and we loved her in it. That was fun.
That really was.
This is Dan Silvestri
And Tom Pizzato
from SpyMovieNavigator.com, the worldwide community of spy movie fans. Spy movie podcasts, videos, discussions, and more.